cops catch a strange man at Toronto airport and are surprised even more by the contents of his bag. A trip to the airport is not usually a pleasant one, and with all the waiting in queues and on the checkpoints, it becomes more frustrating. But if we were to let you in on a secret, then the wait and the queues are 1,000 times better than the guard dogs pouncing on you. The story that follows offers you all kinds of surprises and joy. It starts when a Canadian man lands on an airport with a bag and how the events unfold after that. But what was so unusual about this mystery man of ours that'll leave everyone surprised? The world nowadays is at our fingertips, and with all the technology that the 21st century has to offer, it becomes nearly impossible for anything to remain hidden. And with the advanced tracking systems, it's quite easy to find things that aren't even visible to our eyes. The airport is one such place that shows how much technology has advanced. Nothing remains hidden to the authorities at the airport. It's nearly impossible to take something to the airport which is not allowed and not get caught. And even when every person knows this thing, some people try their luck and try to bring things that aren't permitted. More often than not, these people end up with the officials with their hands behind their backs tied with cuffs. But even with all the equipment and the detectors installed at the airport, there have been times when people were able to legally sneak things under the nose of the authorities, and this is a story of both cases combined. An incident took place at Pearson International Airport in Toronto, which left even the officials in shock. Ippolit Badunov was one of the persons who deboarded at the same airport and was looking like any usual passenger. Even after knowing the fact that all the odds are stacked against him, he was still going to try something almost impossible to pull off. You could call him foolhardy, but even he might have known it was a dumb thing to do. As soon as Ippolit's flight landed at the Pearson International Airport in Toronto, he got down and started walking away. The Ontario native tried to act like a normal passenger who might be jet-lagged and glad that his half-day journey was over. Ippolit boarded the flight from Russia and got down in Toronto, but when he got down in Toronto, something seemed a bit odd about him. Even though he was trying to act normal, he could not remain calm knowing about the stowaways in his carry-on luggage. When Ippolit stepped off the airplane in Toronto, he could feel that there was something that he couldn't hide even if he wanted to. His heart started pounding heavily and he knew that it was too big a risk that he was about to take. It was a big deal, but he had already smuggled the bag once at the Russian airport, but this time things didn't seem to be going his way. Fate had entirely different plans for Ippolit than it had the first time, and this time it was not going to be in his favor. Ippolit tried to act coolly and not make anyone suspicious about his luggage and the contents of his baggage. Everything was going fine till one point, but an official who was in charge in security felt something odd about Ippolit. Ippolit's greatest foe was about to come into the picture. Ippolit had always disliked dogs, and it turns out they were going to be the hero of this whole situation. His biggest nightmare was about to come true. Although the majority of people find dogs to be cute, some people are scared of them. He started to act confident as he thought it would fend all the suspicion off him. He was carrying out his plan, and everything was going great. But there was one thing he didn't consider: the Border Patrol canines. Many of the people don't like a trip to the airport with all the waiting and hustle-bustle that surrounds the place. The view of Border Patrol canines is not a pleasant one, and their capability of smelling things from a distance is one thing many smugglers fear. The Border Patrol canines have a great sense of smell, and that was exactly the thing that Ippolit was dreading. However, he'd done it once at the time of boarding. How hard would it be to do it again? He reached for the papers relating to his journey and shuffled up to the customs agent. But as soon as he reached for his bag to take out the papers, he heard a bark. He thought that the dogs might be barking at somebody else, but he couldn't have been more wrong. He was living with a misconception that no one would discover the contents of the bag. He thought the canines would never be able to find about his bags, but they had never failed in catching the scent of what he's carrying. The dog started barking furiously, and at this time he started panicking. Ippolit knew that he was in trouble the moment he saw those dogs barking. It didn't matter how cool he acted, he knew he was busted. When the barks started increasing with every passing moment, he hoped they'd have caught wind of something else. He casually turned back to see what was happening, and he saw that all the dogs were on him. It was the bag that Ippolit was carrying the dogs were interested in. They started pouncing on the bags. The security personnel had to keep the dogs in control, but they were clear about the fact that the bag had something in it that no one other than the dogs could sense. The agents took the dogs aside and tied them while other agents snatched the bag from him at once. The agents had to be very cautious while opening the bag. One of the agents took charge, and when he opened it, he was left in shock. The agent opened the bag, and to his surprise, the bag had another bag inside of it. This confused the agents, but this was only the beginning of many surprises to follow. When he opened the other bag, he was left in shock again. This time he couldn't believe his eyes. The bag had 10 other small bags that looked very suspicious. When the agent touched the bag, he realized the bags were too damp. The agents wanted to be sure before opening the package that it didn't have anything that would cause a problem. One of the agents took one of the bags and sniffed it to ensure it wasn't anything dangerous. The sniff and the amount of perfume he breathed was enough to make him reach the conclusion that whoever packed it made sure they were packed in a way that no one would discover them or what was inside. At once, the security agents arrested Hippolyte. Now the question was, what was inside the bags? The security agents thought it was a regular case of smuggling, and the bags might contain some contraband like drugs or jewelry. But all their expectations were about to meet a shocking realization. The security agents opening those bags started to regret stopping Hippolyte in the first place. The agents found that the bags were filled with leeches, and there were thousands of them. According to the security agents, there were more than 1,000 leeches, and all of them were alive and squirming. The mode of transport had been suspicious, and their packaging made it more suspicious than it already was. But the agents weren't quite sure the leeches were illegally imported. Now the security agents had to find out more about the leeches, but they didn't have any expertise. Therefore, they decided to contact an expert and ask them for answers, as they didn't have a clue. They contacted the experts at the Royal Ontario Museum and the American Museum of Natural History. Now, using all the technology available to the experts, the zoologists had to analyze the breed of the leeches and whether they were bred or caught. As soon as the sample reached the experts, Sebastian Kvist, a curator of invertebrate zoology at the Royal Ontario Museum, identified the creatures as Hirudo verbanum. He later told the authorities that it is used for medical purposes. The experts added that while many types of leeches are used for medical purposes, the thing that made this breed of leech so different from the others was the fact that it was an endangered species. It's not the first time that this species of leech was being used for medical purposes, as it's been used for centuries for curing various illnesses. The earliest proof of leeches being used in medical purposes can be found in the notes of Indian physicians Charaka and Sushruta from the 8th century. It was in the 2nd century that the medical leeches made their way to the Western world, and it was a Greco-Roman physician, Galen, that made them so popular. The practice of bleeding the patients was favored by him and was very well received by everyone. And because this practice was becoming so common, the physicians were often called by the name leeches. And very soon, for preventing infections and treating illnesses around the world, bloodletting became a standard procedure, and it was places like Eastern Europe and the Americas where this practice became a prominent technique. If we're to believe the stories surrounding these facts, then in the 19th century, almost 6 million leeches were used, and a total of 300,000 liters of blood was drawn from the patients, and this stat is only for Paris. With the development of technologies, the practice of using leeches for medical purposes has fallen out of favor. But there are still many people who are ready to pay for these slippery creatures. The value of Hirudo verbena on the open market ranges from $6 to $14 a piece. And by the time all these facts came to light, the counting of the leeches that were procured from Hippolyte had reached more than 5,000. The smuggler's antics pointed out to the fact that he was an amateur in these kinds of things. Hippolyte might have been thinking that this day would yield him a great profit, but he couldn't have been any more wrong. Canada's zero-tolerance policy on the sale of exploited animals was one thing Hippolyte didn't consider while smuggling the leeches, and as a result he was fined $15,000 and was banned for importing or exporting any endangered species of wild flora and fauna. The leeches that are found to be of illegal origin are usually disposed of in a nearby water body, and this disrupts the natural balance of the ecosystem. And this is not the first time. There are various varieties of European leeches that are already being found in Canadian lakes as a result of this dumping practice.